Welcome to the Knox County Public Library and the Tutor Team. It's Mrs. Worland and second, third grade. Today is your day for reading, and I have the most wonderful book to share with you. Some of you may have heard my story before, some of you may have not, and it's called The Invisible Boy. This book is going to speak a powerful message to us, and that's one of our goals today, is to determine what that powerful message is. And then we're going to work on sequencing the story. So, get ready, and I want you to think about the invisible boy. What do you think this story is going to be about? You said a boy. Now, do you think he's really invisible? Well, let's find out. Can you see Brian, the invisible boy? Even Mrs. Carlotti has trouble noticing him in her classroom. She's too busy dealing with Nathan and Sophie. Can you pick out Nathan and Sophie? Why do you think she's having a hard time noticing him? Well, because Brian is doing what he's supposed to be doing. Some of the others are just standing there. But let's look at Nathan and Sophie. Wow, that's a lot. Nathan has problems with what Mrs. Carlotti calls volume control. He uses his outside voice inside too much. Sophie whines and complains when she doesn't get her way. Nathan and Sophie take up a lot of space. Brian doesn't. Oh, you said you think Nathan and Sophie's a lot? Yeah, I agree. They're a lot. But then there's Brian. Quiet. When the bell rings for recess, Micah and JT take turns choosing kids for their kickball team. The best players get picked first. Then the best friends of the best players. Then the friends of the best friends. Only Brian is left, still waiting and hoping. So do you think it was fair how they chose the players for their teams? How would you have chose? JT glances in Brian's direction and just as quickly looks away. We've got enough players for each team, he tells the others. Let's play ball. Wow. When JT glances in Brian's direction and quickly looks away, I would feel so bad if someone pretended not to notice me. How would that make you feel? In the cafeteria, Madison and her friends talk about her birthday party. The rope swing over the pool was awesome, says JT. Yeah, and so was the water slide, adds Fiona. That was the best pool party ever. I'm so glad you guys had fun, says Madison. Everyone did except Brian. He wasn't invited. So do you think Madison and her friends were being mean by talking about the party in front of Brian? What could she have done differently? Maybe have had that conversation at recess when Brian wasn't around, so not to hurt his feelings. At choosing time, while the other kids played board games and read, Brian sits at his table, doing what he loves to do best. He draws fire-breathing dragons, scaling tall buildings, space aliens locked in intergalactic battles, and superheroes with the power to make friends wherever they go. I'm Carlotti introduces Justin, a new student, to the class. Brian smiles shyly at him. Some of the other kids sneak looks at Justin, trying to figure out if he's cool enough to be their friend. They haven't quite made up their minds yet. Now, they're looking at him trying to think if he's cool enough to be their friend. So, what does it take to be a real friend, though? What qualities do you look for in a friend? At lunch, Madison and JT watch Justin eat with chopsticks. What's that? Asked Madison as she points at Justin's food. It's bulgogi. Bul what? Bulgogi. It's Korean barbecued beef. My grandma made it for me. It's really good. Would you like to try some? There's no way I'd eat bulgogi. And all the kids laugh. All of them, that is, except Brian. He sits there wondering which is worse, being laughed at or feeling invisible. Feels invisible because they never include him. The next day, when Justin goes to his cubby to put away his backpack, he notices a piece of paper with his name on it. Justin, I thought the bulgogi looked good. Brian. Coming out. Yum. Wonder how that made Justin feel when he got that note. At morning recess, Brian finds a piece of chalk on the ground and starts drawing. You're Brian, right? Yeah. Thanks for the note. Hey, Justin, Emilio calls out from the tetherball court. You're up next. Sorry, I gotta go, says Justin. By the way, that's a really cool drawing, he adds, before taking off. Back in class, Mrs. Carlotti asked the kids to team up in twos or threes for a special project. The kids scurry around the room to pair off. Brian heads toward Justin. I'm already with Justin, says Emilio. Find someone else. Brian looks at the floor, wishing he could draw a hole right there to swallow him up. It's awful. Mrs. Carlotti said we could have up to 3 in our group. We're only 2. Come on, Emilio. Let him work with us. Okay, I guess. Now I want you to look at Brian here. And look at Brian. What do you notice? Right. He's made to look, the grays and the whites invisible, but he has a little more color to him here. I wonder why. Think about it. Mrs. Carlotti gives the class directions for the project. Your assignment is to work together to write a story about what you see in the photograph. Use your imagination and have fun. Whoa, cool, says Emilio. What kind of people do you think would live in houses like that? I don't know, but I bet Brian could draw them to go with our story, says Justin. Brian smiles as he takes out his lucky pen. What? What do you notice? What do you notice about Brian? That's right. He has more color coming to him. Have you figured out why? That is so odd. The crooked story we made up on the spot. You figured it out why Brian is more and more in color? That's right. People are noticing him. He's not invisible anymore. It's lunchtime again. Brian's least favorite part of the day. Another 20 long minutes of kids talking and laughing with everyone else but him. Brian! He hears someone shout, "Hey, Brian, over here." Brian turns and sees Justin waving him over. Emilio nods at Brian as he makes room for him at the table. Cookie? Thanks. Maybe, just maybe, Brian's not so invisible after all. The Invisible Boy. So what do you guys think of that story? I love this story. What was the main message that the author was trying to convey? Let me give you a moment to think about it. That's right. The main message is making sure that you include others. You should never make anyone feel invisible or like they don't matter. Okay? Everyone matters. I don't think you'd want to be treated that way. So don't treat others that way. Kindness goes a long way. Now, let's talk about our story and sequencing it. I'm going to go flip over the paper. All right, so here we go. Then a new kid named Justin came to school. In class, the teacher asked the children to form teams to work on a project together. Justin told Emilio he wanted Brian to join their team. Brian shows his imagination to help the project come out great. Brian was a quiet boy in his classroom. No one seemed to notice him, not even his teacher. At lunch, Brian was asked to join the other kids at the table. He was no longer invisible. The other kids made fun of Justin's lunch, but Brian wrote him a note and said it sounded good. His class left him out, so Brian did what he loved to do. He loved to draw. The next day, Justin thanked Brian for the note at recess time. Justin was nice to Brian. Okay, so remember, when we want to put a story in sequence, we need to think, recall the facts of how the book, the order that the story was told. So what I like to do is I like to go back and read each one as I go and ask myself, was that the first thing that happened? So then a new kid named Justin came from school. Yeah, that didn't happen at the beginning. In class, the teacher asked the children to form teams to work on a project together. Justin told Emilio he wanted Brian to join their team. Yeah, you're right. That was more near the end. Brian shows his imagination to help the project come out great. Yeah, you're right. Those two kind of go together. And that was more near the end. Brian was a quiet boy in his classroom. No one seemed to notice him, not even his teacher. What? You're right. That was the first thing that happened in the story. So I'm going to put in number 1 and circle it. Now, so Brian was quiet. No one seemed to notice him. So let's look and read back through on what we think was the second main event in the story. Then a new kid named Justin came to school. Yeah, you're right, no. In class, the teacher asked children to form teams to work on a project together. Justin told Emilio he wanted Brian to join their team. Yeah, you're right, not yet. Brian shows his imagination to help the project come out great. That was toward the end, you're right. At lunch, Brian was asked to join the other kids at the table. He no longer felt invisible. Not yet. The other kids made fun of Justin's lunch, but Brian wrote him a note and said it sounded good. Yeah, you're right. We're not there yet. His class left him out, So Brian did what he loved to do. He loved to draw. You're right. Good job. So that's the second. Now let's think about what happened next in the story. Then a new kid named Justin came to school. In class, the teacher asked the children to form teams to work on a project together. Justin told Emilio he wanted Brian to join their team. Brian shows his imagination and the project comes out great. At lunch, Brian was asked to join the other kids at the table. He no longer feels invisible. The other kids made fun of Justin's lunch, but Brian wrote him a note and said it sounded good. The next day, Justin thanked Brian for the note at recess time. Justin was nice to Brian. What? Oh, then a new kid named Justin came to school? Excellent. That's the third thing that happened. Now, so the new kid named Justin came to school. Are we ready for the project yet? To form the team? No, we're not there yet. Brian shows imagination to help the project come out great. At lunch, Brian was asked to join the table. We're not there yet. The other kids made fun of Justin's lunch, but Brian wrote him a note and said it sounded good. You're right. Now, after they made fun of Justin's lunch and Brian wrote him the note, what happened next? Are they ready to work on the project? Is Brian showing his imagination to help the project come out? Is Brian been asked yet to join the kids at the table? Or the next day, Justin thanked Brian for the note at recess time? You're right, very good. That's the fifth thing that happened. Now, what happened next? In class, the teacher asked the children to form teams to work on a project together. Justin told Emilio he wanted Brian to join their team. Brian shows his imagination to help the project come out great. Or at lunch, Brian was asked to join the other kids at the table and he no longer feels invisible. That's right. Now we're finally at where they had to form the teams. So that is number 6. That's the 6th thing that happened in the story. Now, we have 2 more. Now, after they formed the team, Brian shows his imagination to help the project come out great. Or at lunch, Brian was asked to join the other kids at the table and no longer feels invisible. Well, right. It has to be that he shows his imagination and the project comes out great, and then he is asked to join lunch. So now let's read them in order and see if it makes sense. Brian was a quiet boy in his classroom. No one seemed to notice him, not even his teacher. His class left him out, so Brian did what he loved to do. He loved to draw. Then a new kid named Justin came to school. The other kids made fun of Justin's lunch, but Brian wrote him a note and said it sounded good. The next day, Justin thanked Brian for the note at recess time. Justin was nice to Brian. In class, the teacher asked the children to form teams to work on a project together. Justin told Emilio he wanted Brian to join their team. Brian shows his imagination to help the project come out great. And at lunch, Brian was asked to join the other kids at the table, and he no longer feels invisible. Great job, friends. You are really doing well on sequencing the story. I really hope that you enjoyed the story, The Invisible Boy, a powerful book about including everyone and being kind and treating people like you want to be treated. So, this is Mrs. Worland with the Knox County Public Library and the Tutor Team. Remember, if you like my story, it's on the Knox County Public Library Facebook page. And they also provide a hyperlink. So if you really like this story, you can go back to it and listen again. Remember, kindness matters. Thanks for joining me.